Hi guys and welcome. After my old iMac started to struggle to keep up with the increasing workload I threw at it and eventually had some kind of hard drive fail, I decided to look around for a new editing machine that I could use for my freelance film projects apart from YouTube as well. After all, the choice fell on the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, which Apple massively improved over the older 15-inch Pro models. Now the iMac that'll hopefully be sold as soon as possible already had rather nice speakers, although they were far from accurate sounding with way too much upper bass and peaks in the treble. I was generally rather satisfied with them. But with the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, Apple decided to take it to a whole other level and really took some time to improve the speakers from the already good sounding 15-inch Pro models. When I first used the new 16-inch model, I was already impressed with it, and I thought it sounded very mature but also a lot more balanced than the iMac. And then some days ago I was editing and I wanted to listen to some music while I was doing so, and thought that the MacBook might already be enough for some casual music listening and that you might not even need a small micro Bluetooth speaker anymore. And that's what led me to comparing some speakers directly to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. To be more exact, I compared the JBL Go 2, which is a very small entry-level Bluetooth speaker for around 20 euros, and the Vifa City, which could be considered a high-end micro Bluetooth speaker that retails for around 120 euros. And that's already exactly what we are doing today. We are comparing the MacBook Pro to these two speakers. If you want to skip all of the technical stuff and other talking, and you just want to hear the MacBook compared to the JBL Go and the Vifa City with several different tracks, you can skip to and start listening to the comparison right away. Now to quickly run on the specs, which some of you might have already heard of in the tons of videos about the MacBook that are out there, but maybe I can give you some additional or new information about the speaker setup, because apart from some others, I also took some time to measure all of the speakers, compare it to the other speaker measurements that I took. So yeah, let's just quickly get into the technical stuff. It's a stereo setup with 6 individual drivers. I'm not exactly sure though which drivers are used for what. It could be a 3-way system, which would be very impressive already, or 2 woofers and 4 full range drivers. I'm not sure. What is certain though, like I said already, is that there are 2 dedicated subwoofers, or rather woofers, that are actually oriented in a push-push orientation, which seems like something obvious to do in a laptop because it cancels out most vibrations from the woofers, decreases distortion and increases precision, but seems to be unique and new to the new MacBook Pro. Thanks to the multiple individual drivers, you also avoid common intermodulation distortion, which happens when one driver has to play many different frequencies at once but can't really handle it, and the stereo setup of the drivers makes the sound even cleaner overall. And of course, Apple also used some psychoacoustic stereo and bass enhancing processing here, which probably is the only real way to get any mature sound out of speakers that are this small. But now let's see how all of this talk looks when actually measured out technically. Now when you normally place the laptop right in front of you with the screen at a normal angle and the volume at around 45%, the frequency response looks like this. And that's really impressive already. What I see first is that the general response looks rather even and balanced. There is no major peak or dip anywhere except at roughly over 1 kHz, which can be ignored because it appears to be a cancellation from my microphone placement in this case. Next, you also notice that the bass reaches down flat to slightly below 100 Hz. Here's another measurement with the microphone directly at the opening for the woofers, and of course that's far from any real sub bass, but it's at least as much as most other micro Bluetooth speakers offer. They all usually steeply roll off after 100 Hz or even earlier, and for a laptop this response is really impressive. Now here are some other measurements from different angles. Red is from directly above the speaker and blue is from a flatter angle than I recorded originally. And even those two still look more than usable, which tells us that the MacBook also has a rather nice and even dispersion pattern. Now that's theoretically to be expected from such small drivers, but it's still nice to find out. At higher volumes, above roughly 55%, the limiter or bass reduction starts to kick in and keeps the bass at one clean volume while only allowing higher frequencies to actually get louder. And then at low volumes, Apple actually integrated loudness. This means that the MacBook dynamically boosts bass with decreasing volume to keep a full and big sound even at lower listening levels. Let's also compare the measurements of the MacBook Pro to today's competitors. So here's the JBL Go 2 in comparison, And you can see it looks a lot worse. The bass rolls off earlier and it has a very critical rising response across almost the entire frequency band. I also took a short look at the distortion graphs, and while the MacBook at normal volumes is rather clean, below 3% overall THD distortion, the JBL Go really has some nasty peaks in the distortion on higher frequencies. So that's very noticeable and quite a big disadvantage when compared to the MacBook. And then here's the Vifa City in a 45-degree angle, which is what Vifa recommends. And it does look a bit better than the MacBook, but generally they are rather close, especially when it comes to sound balance and bass response. But now let's finally take an actual listen to the different speakers. We'll start with the MacBook compared to the JBL Go 2, and then we will move on to the Vifa. As always, I'm wearing high quality binaural microphones to give you the most realistic sound impression possible. Therefore, you'll have to wear headphones, so make sure to put them up and enjoy the sound comparison.
To breathe. With the speed comes my devotion. When I got you with me. Oh.
Now that was the JBL Go 2 in comparison, and you could hear how the MacBook actually has no problem keeping up with a small Bluetooth speaker like the JBL Go 2. I would even say that the MacBook performed better than the JBL overall. One thing that's better on the JBL though is the initial upper bass dynamics when the bass kicks. The MacBook probably still has a bit less overall volume, internal volume for the speaker, and that's probably why the JBL still has some better dynamics in this area. But I also only mean initial bass kick, because it seems like there is some kind of limiter issue going on with the JBL, where it reduces the bass when the song gets busy or bass heavy, even on lower volumes. Usually the limiter only kicks in at high volumes to protect the driver from distorting when the bass hits too hard, but with many small speakers, including many small JBL speakers, it seems to do that way earlier in the volume range already. The source of the problem seems to be that because the iPhone syncs the volume between itself and the speaker, the amp in the JBL delivers full amplification all the time and the volume gets controlled via the Bluetooth chip. When the amp does this, or when the amp delivers full amplification, the limiter thinks that the amp is at its limit and activates itself to limit all of the bass kicks, even though you aren't even listening on high volumes. With Android phones, where volumes between the speaker and the phone are not synced, this issue probably doesn't occur because you can kind of match the amplification to the actual loudness on the phone and so on. You can kind of play around with this. So if you are an Android user, you can definitely take advantage of this. But when you are an Apple user, iPhone user, or even some newer Android phones also do this kind of syncing stuff with the Bluetooth devices, you are kind of screwed with the JBL Go 2. But now let's move on to the next comparison with the Vifa City and take a listen to that.
No, you know you got me losing all my cool, 'cause I'm burning up on you. In control of what I do, and I love the way you move. Get the heat and the thrill, gives you more than any pill. Never running out of juice, but it's only me and you. You got me losing all my cool. I guess you're ready for the summer. I like us better when we're intertwined. The way you just because you're lonely doesn't mean we go back to the start. Just because you're lonely don't mean that you can play with my heart. Who do you think you are? Just because you're lonely doesn't mean we go back to the start. Just because you're lonely don't mean that you can play with my heart. Who do you think you are? You say you've changed and you're different, but I don't wanna hear that. Stay. I got this feeling we should go somewhere, go somewhere. We should go somewhere. No rhyme or reason, yeah, I just don't care. No, I just don't care. We should go somewhere now. I got this feeling we should go somewhere, go somewhere. We should go somewhere. No rhyme or reason, yeah, I just don't care. No, I just don't care. We should go somewhere now. We get caught up in the motion. I forget to breathe.
In this test, I think the Vifa won overall because it still sounds more dynamic and natural than the Macbook, although it is rather close in some parts. Because the Vifa is an actual speaker, has a bigger enclosure and a bigger driver that can move more air, it just sounds a bit more, like I said, natural, more dynamic in the bass kicks. The bass doesn't seem kind of faked, like on the Macbook, where they only achieve lower bass because of the psychoacoustic tuning and so on. With the Vifa, it's just real bass. Of course, it's not super low, but it definitely is a bit more natural than on the MacBook. But still, there are some things going for the MacBook here. It does have some stereo separation, whereas the Vifa City doesn't have any, which can be critical if you are editing some videos or music and you just need some kind of stereo resolution and 2-channel audio. It also has the advantage of having loudness built in, so at low volumes it would become a lot fuller sounding. Let's hear how that compares against the Vifa that doesn't have loudness built in. So the results of this low volume test overall are still similar to before, but the MacBook in this case did gain quite a bit of low end and also sounds much cleaner than before. But now let's wrap this up. After all of these tests, the answer to the title question is yes, the MacBook can replace a Bluetooth speaker, at least as long as you compare it to rather entry-level speakers. Of course, a bigger Bluetooth speaker will sound a lot better than the built-in ones on the MacBook, but we're just talking about entry-level ones, like the JBL Go, for example. So if you have the new MacBook Pro 16-inch and you just want to listen to some music in the background, or you just want to do some editing on the go maybe, you probably don't need separate speakers. In fact, I even use the speakers of the MacBook Pro for my first edit of all of my videos, and that is also made possible by the rather linear frequency response of the speakers, which give you a good idea of how the recording of your microphone sounds like. You can easily detect if there's a peak in your microphone, and you can already correct this on the MacBook even without using any studio monitors or headphones. But of course, I should add to this, for your final edit, or if you are working in some music production, you should still listen to your video or your recording with real speakers. But just for the first edit and to get some idea of the sound that you recorded, the MacBook seems to be more than good enough, and that's already quite impressive. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out any uploads in the future. And until then, have a good time, and especially stay safe in this current time. Make sure to care for the people around you and for yourself as well. And I'll see you in the next one.